Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining from near and far, and from kayaks and bedrooms and other spots. We're delighted today to have Andrew Costa with us, who is the administrative coordinator with the Davenport Perth Community Ministry, and he's helping to bring together the Gete Onigaming Land Trust organization. Did I pronounce that correct, Andrew?
Gete Onigaming.
Gete Onigaming, much better. Thank you. Um, the Gete Onigaming Land Trust organization in the Davenport community. And he's also a doctoral candidate in the Department of Law and Legal Studies at Carleton, researching Indigenous and Crown treaties on the territories now called Canada. He's an international Indigenous rights, social and economic rights, and the rights to housing advocate. And he's going to talk to us a little bit today about this really exciting idea of land trusts and how it connects with us and our Indigenous neighbors as well. So welcome, Andrew, and thank you for making the time today.
Well, absolutely. Thank you, Lori. And I'd like to sincerely thank St. Matthew's United for this opportunity, just to be able to present kind of a broad overview as to what we've been up to at the Davenport Perth Community Ministry over the past few months, and even to a certain extent over the past couple of years, in putting this initiative together, and just to see it really kind of develop and be able to present it to all of you, really wonderful people today is a real blessing. And so to start, I'd like to share my screen here and introduce you to my presentation. So in terms of some objectives here, in terms of how this presentation is going to be kind of laid out, I will be first explaining what neighborhood land trusts are. I'm sure there are most of you, if not all of you, quite frankly, have a good idea as to what land trusts are. Some of the objectives of which they look to develop. But nevertheless, it's always good to go through fundamentals. I'll also tell you about some ideas that the Davenport Perth Community Ministry has had about putting together the Gete Onigaming Land Trust in Davenport. And finally, I'd like to ask for all of your opinions on what else do you believe could be done to develop the Gete Onigaming Land Trust any further. So with that in mind, I just want to start most importantly with the naming of the land trust in particular. And I'm really happy that Tina is here today, because again, the name of the land trust, the Gete Onigaming, that was largely the result of her just inspiration in regard to this process there. She, over the past couple of years, for certain initiatives we have put together, whether they be video related or in relation to our survey that Canada Summer Job students have put together last year, which I'll be discussing later, she always referred to it as the Gete Onigaming Land Trust. And eventually after that, after she had actually gone on her leave, we had started just, incidentally calling it that ourselves. So the roots of that obviously are tied to our indebtedness to the Anishinaabe, Mohawk, Seneca, Huron, Wendat, Mississaugas of the Credit, and other Indigenous peoples whose ancestral homes in Gete Onigaming, which is translated to Old Portage Trail, had once been all water and had then become a trail that ran east and west throughout the territories now called Toronto. The Talking Treaties Collective has pointed out that this area has long been a cultural crossroads. Many nations passed through it while traveling east and west along the waterfront, or north and south along the river and portage routes to the upper Great Lakes. The Gete Onigaming Land Trust celebrates Indigenous peoples' eternal presence on the territories now called Toronto through seeking out their support in developing a land trust initiative that brings to get people together in the hopes of strengthening relationships among the underserved and marginalized communities that now make up the Davenport Perth neighborhood. So in essence, that's the root reason behind why it is called the Gete Onigaming Land Trust in particular. Now, just some quick questions here. And again, as I mentioned at the outset, I'm sure some of you or most of you already know what a land trust is, but just for the sake of fundamentals, does anyone know what a land trust is? And if you do, what do you know? What do you know about land trusts, and how did you learn about them? So feel free to if you'd like to put something in the comments, or if you'd like to, just unmute and provide a quick response, feel free to do so. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And they're doing great work over in Kensington, Mark. As I mentioned prior to the presentation, other initiatives that have been really inspirational have been those around in Chinatown. Obviously, Parkdale has been incredibly prominent in some of the land that they've been able to secure for similar purposes as well. Kensington Market has now even taken to putting together community bonds. And we don't need to get into that, but those are just some of the initiatives that a lot of really great land trusts around the city have put together. But anyone else have any responses? Or I know that uh, uh, Jay had put a comment, public space held in the common good. Yeah, that's a really that's a good sort of overall summation of land trusts in terms of their objectives, what they seek to achieve in their development. But essentially, turning now to NLTs in themselves, or even community land trusts. But NLTs are organizations that purchase or lease public or private land to keep in trust at affordable prices over several decades. So essentially, what NLTs do is they remove land from the private market through purchasing it with no debt through either buying out the property owner directly, or developing a leasing agreement that ensures the land will be collectively held at affordable rates in perpetuity. Ultimately, I would imagine it depends on, who the prior owner would be, whether that be a municipal owner, maybe they would be much more amenable in that case. If if they are a private owner and they're somewhat recalcitrant, to be honest, maybe in that case, they would have to, in the case of one representative with a Chinatown Land Trust once told me, well, we just have to buy them out. So in essence, there are a lot of different ways at which lands could be sort of purchased or leased in regard to land trust, but the objective is to ensure that it is held in trust on behalf of the overall community. So the land trust would essentially develop a certain kind of organizational structure that ensures that residents' interests in regard to affordability, in regard to, or other needs are served. So in that way, what they do to keep land, to ensure that lands remain affordable, are essentially having restrictions on how much departing residents can sell their homes and or rental units for. And these restrictions for land trusts are otherwise known as ground leases. These leases are a tool that NLTs use to regulate the resale value of protected land. And these leases can be commensurate with the resident's overall income or even lower. So for example, I'm sure many people here have heard about RGI, and that could be one objective, one initiative in which to ensure that properties or units remain relatively affordable within a land trust for a long period of time. In some cases, some land trusts, they would charge even lower. They would charge, let's say, my goodness, maybe only a couple of $100. Like, it really depends on how the trusts themselves operate. The purposes of these leases, these ground leases, is to ensure that trusts can look to other funding streams to provide a whole host of activities and services to residents without having to increase their rates in turn. Admittedly, this is a tension that some land trusts that I've heard about have struggled with, particularly in the United States, in regard to, okay, how can we ensure that the land trust can provide a multitude of other services while at the same time ensuring that rates do not rise? So it's a bit of a tension that land trusts have to work through. Usually other funding streams are sought after, and generally they're achieved there, whether they be low income sort of property builders or other sort of charitable organizations providing their assistance as well. But therein leads to another interesting tension when it comes to land trusts as well, and that comes about in their overall structure. So NLTs typically operate through what's described as a quote unquote board of directors. And the board structure typically includes residents, which are known as lessees, surrounding communities, which are known as general members, and outside supporters, which are known as public members. So it's imagine a kind of a series of concentric circles that kind of build on one another. Now, just to provide some further expansion on that idea. So residents, obvious, obvious, as to what that would imply. Surrounding communities, though, would imply people that potentially live in and around the land trust area, or those who may work within the area as well. And outside supporters, typically outside supporters encompass potentially other sort of donors or other organizational supports to the land trust. Okay. So those are essentially how land trusts are typically structured. Now, it is important to point out that some NLTs don't adhere to the structure. So, for example, some don't have residents on their board of directors because some NLTs may exist as part of organizations with these institutions taking control over them. So, for example, if you have a major, as I mentioned earlier, kind of low-income property builder or developer organization that, let's say, would look to have somewhat of a affordable housing portfolio attached to it, and they would essentially say, okay, here is this group of people or this sort of subset of our organization that we tasked to take care of this series of affordable units, right? Then that could be described as a quote unquote land trust to a certain extent, if that makes sense. So that's one way to do it. On the other hand, there are some land trusts that don't have any outside support. Now, obvious in terms of basically residents have a decided say in terms of, okay, how the land trust is structured, how what other resources it will maintain and what other resources it will provide to residents. So there are some that are much more resident focused. Again, there's an interesting dynamic there because on the one hand, if you focus exclusively toward being a resident controlled land trust, you're in a situation where it might be a little bit difficult to scale up in some cases. On the other hand, if you are a land trust that is primarily filtered through a big organization, that's problematic to a certain extent because it leaves aside community need, it leaves aside the broader needs of a community and maybe just has a singular focus on something like affordable housing instead of food or recreation or things of that nature. Now, NLTs also take part, as mentioned just now, to take part in resident engagement activities that include things like community gardening and other educational advancement initiatives. So just to provide an example, Parkdale established, their land trust was established through both of these initiatives. So essentially preserving preserving small bits of land at the outset through community gardening initiatives. And in Kensington Market, for example, educational advancement, getting residents involved with university research departments to determine the level of housing need in the area, to build up their land trust from there. So those are just some ways in which land trusts can function in general. But now turning towards our own work and turning towards an initiative that Tina had put together with Canada Summer Job students last summer. It's important to really understand what they did and the great work that they did and how we in turn built on that. So Canada Summer Job students have put together a research survey last summer to determine whether Davenport Perth residents had an interest in NLTs. They also gathered some ideas of how NLTs could best serve the needs of the community. And the results, which I do include in this presentation, determined that housing, food accessibility, and recreational space were the resources most needed in the area. Now, I'll explore these results in more detail in the next few slides. So, turning toward housing, residents who completed last year's land trust survey noted that their housing needs were based upon providing, and these are comments directly from the surveys, providing home ownership opportunities for learning how to make it possible. So this participant noted rent-to-own programs or collaborations with other public and private housing developers. Others had emphasized utilizing networks and existing spaces to advocate for community needs. Others had pointed out that providing a safe space for safe communication for members of Davenport Perth. And others really emphasized very specific objectives related to building more seniors housing or health supportive housing. So now turning towards the food needs, residents pointed out that it was important to better the community by making food accessibility spaces more accessible along with gym space or rec space. Others emphasize food in relation to providing resources to services not well served within the community. And others just emphasize bringing back the dining. But now also with recreation, residents have pointed out that providing green space, so that residents can alter and design, uh, and providing spaces for people to gather, applying for grants to support sustainable programming and projects, or providing resources not served within the community. So those are just some objectives there too, in terms of what residents want, what residents desire in relation to a land trust. And essentially what we're doing now is to determine how this land trust can fill in these gaps. Now, turning towards the overall results of the surveys, as you can see, housing, rec space, and food are the major priorities. But looking towards looking towards some of the other categories, you'll find that there are obviously some overlap between them. So obviously you would imagine that kitchen would connect to food and what have you. But in terms of just the way they were put together on the surveys, this was essentially how it was all laid out. So and also too, as I mentioned at the outset, I will include a copy of this presentation so that you all can see it on your leisure. But now just turning toward what we're specifically doing in regard to our own work and what we have been doing over these past few months. And especially now, with Tina, and now with her interim replacement, Rachel, some of the initiatives that we're working toward at this point in time. So right now, we are currently in the process of developing our inaugural Gete Onigaming Land Trust Steering Committee, comprised of individuals who have a wealth of experience in real estate, urban planning, community organizing, teaching, and social media campaigning. And we're planning on holding our inaugural steering committee gathering sometime in the next couple of months. I'll also be debuting a Gete Onigaming Community Land Trust Charter workshop at the event as well, because it's important to lay out at least a general outline of some of the core principles to which we'll be appealing to when we develop our land trust as well. In relation to the inaugural steering committee gathering, what we've done is we've applied for a funding grant in the hopes of giving us some monetary support to be able to host the event at the Davenport Perth Community Neighborhood Health Center. So that's one initiative that we're planning on doing, at least in the immediate future. But on the other hand, some other initiatives that we're putting together over the next few months include me putting together an 8-week land trust charter course that is a supplement to the workshop that I'm putting together. And I'm looking to bring it to Davenport Perth residents, primarily through my connections with the Bread and Brick Social Justice Group in the area. Also, my connections with the Stop Community Food Center, Arts for All. So there are, so really utilizing these connections to bring these discussions to those spaces. And also, again, just going to those organizations and developing those partnerships to spread awareness on the potential that NLTs have to relieve affordable housing need and build up communal connection all the same. We're also expanding our social media footprint through creating online content about the Gete Onigaming Land Trust to share on Facebook, Instagram, and X, whatever it's called, or Twitter. And so as you'll see here, this is a link for our land trust Facebook page. Now, I will say it's in sort of the earliest stages of its infancy, so it's not the most full with information yet, but it's still, but we're still in the process of really getting it up and running at this point in time. We'll also be working with newly hired Canada Summer Job students to identify other research and outreach strategies. And these could include further developing last year's survey project to be a bit more expansive or to be a bit broader in terms of the number of participants. And we'll also be holding more expansive community events, things like block parties and the like, to really get the land trust out to as many people in the community as we can. And we're also in the process through our steering committee members of identifying various local properties that we believe, at least at the outset, could be ideal sites that the land trust may be able to purchase or lease in the hopes of ensuring affordable housing can be protected and held in perpetuity. And the reason why is because, as I've always mentioned, our neighborhood right now is gentrifying but it's not necessarily gentrified just yet. It's been in the process of gentrifying rapidly for a period of 10 years. But nevertheless, there's still a series of opportunities that we could potentially canvass and identify on which to develop a land trust. And thankfully, as I mentioned before, one of our prospective steering committee members has been very active in identifying potential sites that we could potentially follow up on. Okay, so with that, and turning to it's kind of last part of the presentation here, and I guess this kind of indirectly dovetails into overall question and answer. But with that in mind, I guess the last thing I could point out here is, are you interested? Feel free if you're interested in contributing to the development of the Gete Onigaming Land Trust organization. And if so, how would you like to help out? What do you think you could add to this process? So what I'm going to just follow up with here before I finish up is, although we do have a predilection toward identifying members on the inaugural steering committee that either have sort of lived experience in the area or work experience in the area, that doesn't necessarily preclude anyone from providing any kind of suggestion or guide or sort of idea or means of support that we wouldn't be interested in. Everyone's ideas are invaluable because we're at a stage where we're just picking up influences from wherever we can find them. And that's why I'm very thankful to be here right now, not just to present what we've been doing to all of you, but to be able to hear from all of you as well. So that ends my presentation. Again, I'm very thankful to be here, and very thankful to be here with all of you great people this afternoon. So again, feel free if anybody has any interest, and if anybody would like to help out, feel free to do so. And also as well, you'll find that once I send my presentation out, you'll find my email right at the opening slide. So feel free to contact me as well by email if something kind of comes to you after this presentation is over as well. So thank you very much again, and I look forward to your questions. No, thank you for that. I think right now we're kind of, to a certain extent, building on the Parkdale model in terms of how they initiated it. So with Parkdale, what they had done with their inaugural steering committee was they had really identified individuals that had either, as I mentioned, a lived experience in the area, or were a part of a series of social justice organizations or social service organizations as well, to kind of come, or community organizations, to come together due to their sort of really good read on the community and their ability, and sort of the ability to kind of bring their skills together. So essentially that's what we're doing with this inaugural steering committee. And so we're planning on bringing these individuals together in the hopes of really identifying, okay, what skills can you bring to this? And at the same time, developing a charter in the sense of really kind of distilling some basic principles that would animate what we're doing moving forward in terms of the land trust as well. After that, we're hoping that through partaking in broader community events, as I mentioned, block parties and things of that nature, what we could do is and also through other outreach initiatives in terms of my own sort of 8-week course and things like that, further research. This series of initiatives would help to get us a much sort of larger footprint in the broader neighborhood, and from there we're hoping to really fill out the further iterations of the steering committee further. At the same time, what we're hoping to do as well is, again, as the community building aspect is taking shape, at the same time, be able to take advantage of other opportunities, real estate opportunities in the area, as the steering committee really starts to round out into form as well, so that when something comes up that we truly believe in, okay, great, now we can take advantage. And although the area is gentrifying, as one of our prospective members told me, there's a whole host of opportunities in this area as well. I remember asking a gentleman about this a couple of weeks ago, and he told me, "Oh, you're looking at," like he mentioned that we could be looking at least a dozen potential opportunities over the next few months that we could take advantage of. So it's essentially about rounding out the community, rounding out the steering committee into shape. And then once we do that, the opportunities will still be there, and then we could immediately take advantage. So that's how we're approaching it. We haven't necessarily reached out to BIAs just yet. And like it's something that we've thought about, but at this stage, it's really and maybe that is a part, and I apologize if I can't give you like a much more solid answer on that front, but that would be a part of kind of the broader outreach that we're sort of contemplating at this point. Um, because and again, I think the thing with BIAs is sometimes it just comes down to overall fit in terms of whether or not the interests are in alignment with BIAs. And that's kind of the challenge that we've kind of contemplated when it comes to BIAs. Now, I'm sure that some would be interested, but at the same time, it hasn't necessarily crossed over just yet. But again, as we reach out to the broader community over the next few months, that could definitely be an avenue through which we're pursuing in the future. So I hope that answers your question. I apologize if I don't have anything like really solid on that front yet. Because we have reached out, as I mentioned, we reached out to the land trust. We've reached out to every representative we have at the moment, and they've all been pretty supportive of this initiative as well. So it's tough because Davenport, it's this, as you know, as many of you know, it's this very kind of it's a very intriguing riding because it's like people that live in the area don't necessarily have an idea as to where it realistically ends. So how much it realistically covers. So usually I say it's up to Rogers Road, so to speak. But at the same time, generally speaking, it's tough because on the other hand, we also have near the Bloordale area, we have what's known as the Community Cultural Spaces trust, which isn't necessarily it's not necessarily a land trust that's geared toward affordable housing, but it's a land trust geared much more towards preserving sort of arts and cultural heritage sites in the immediate area. So it's tough because we've admittedly tried to come into contact with them and their members. Haven't had the best luck, admittedly. So it's one of those things where we're trying to through because of that situation, really trying to define okay, what we focus primarily on. To give you a concrete answer on that front, I would probably say that we're focusing primarily on the sort of vicinity in and around, I would probably say, realistically, I'd probably say maybe the Corso Italia area, the Corso Italia Davenport vicinity. Obviously, Davenport and Symington would probably be sort of other vicinities as well that we're really sort of aiming toward, at least in terms of broad, at least in terms of like definable kind of geographical area, if that makes sense. So those obviously Weston Pelham, so those particular areas would probably be sort of our primary focus for as we're initiating, as we sort of really get off the ground. But I hope that answers your question, though. But those are just some of the areas that we're primarily focusing on right now. Right now, I think the biggest thing is in terms of getting that community involvement in tow. Obviously, like it's important to really serve the interest of sort of the two TCH properties or TCH areas that are within. So you have one on Pelham and then you obviously have one on Davenport. So those particular areas are big focuses for us. But at the same time, it is important to also reach out to other residents sort of outside that immediate vicinity too. Hence the reason why it is a bit broad at first, but that's the biggest reason. It's a part of our sort of future outreach. So again, as you probably can imagine, I am not I'm not an economist or a real estate expert, but what I can at least provide kind of a broad outline of that. I hope, in the hopes of answering your question. Um, the other thing that part of getting the steering committee together would be like one of the major sort of objectives would be to develop a sort of a fundraising arm for that. Because again, that's really where a lot of the action really starts. When you get that kind of fundraising status, because again, that's where land trusts really were able, especially I know I keep mentioning them, but that's where organizations like Parkdale really got off the ground moving forward. So it's very important to get to that point. In terms of overall purchases of land and what have you, I mean, it really comes down to what's available. Obviously, as I mentioned, some of our prospective steering committee members, they have a great deal of experience in real estate and city planning, and they've come to us with potential sites, or whether they be that are both private or municipally owned, or even owned by faith-based organizations or what have you. So there's a multitude of opportunities. Obviously, for me, on a personal level, it's important to really kind of expand the portfolio as much as we can in terms of potential opportunities, or for sites on which we could, move forward with, because it's always important to have leverage in the event that you're dealing with a recalcitrant private owner that might not be the most, that would realize, oh, if they're this desperate enough, I could raise prices to this amount and what have you, and then all of a sudden we're priced out. And I could speak to a couple of those in the area here, even where I'm currently living right now. So it's important to really kind of expand that reach. um we've also talked to other members who have talked about, sites that decommissioned hydro site, Toronto hydro sites, things like that. So there are a lot of opportunities there in terms of that process, and it's just a matter of that getting that level, getting identifying an opportunity and not really being fixated on, okay, oh, this site's great or that site's great, but really kind of expanding the portfolio. Because just to personally comment on this very quickly, like, there are a multitude of properties here that Toronto Hydro essentially has almost a certain kind of, I could see like Lori, kind of nodding, as a certain, almost a monopolistic hold over many properties in this area here. And so it's important to expand as much as we can to identify even potential private sites um, in the hopes of like not having to rely on a singular provider to give us, to basically ensure that, okay, if somebody wants to be stubborn, then we could move towards other avenues as well. So I apologize if I haven't answered the kind of nuts and bolts kind of financial aspects, but because essentially we're still working toward that goal. So hopefully in the future I'd be able to give you a much more concrete answer on that front. But it is definitely important. Yes. We've had like so I can't necessarily, like, on a personal information, I can't necessarily speak to whether or not those discussions have been had directly with them. But in terms of whether or not my managers have had those discussions, I'm sure they have. But what I can say is that that has been broached. Topics have been broached with myself in terms of how the United Church could potentially provide further support towards such an initiative. Um, I do know that, like, currently we are in the process, and I'm not sure if this is related, but we are in the process of applying for a church supported grant, the Seeds for of Hope grant as well, that that we're currently like, as I mentioned, we're currently in the process of putting together a grant application. So we have definitely looked, in some respects, we've looked into what support the United Church can provide to such an initiative that we are putting together. I'm sure Tina has definitely reached out in that regard, and I know Rachel has as well, in terms of the fundraising, and not in terms of the grant applications and and things of that nature. But in terms of whether or not I've been involved in that, I haven't, but we have spoken about that. Yes, I've spoken about that with my managers, and I'm sure that they've followed up in their own work on those initiatives. So again, that's the best way I can answer that question. But thank you very much for asking, because it is something that we have looked into. Uh, and I'd be happy to provide links to those folks. It's the Canadian Network of Community Land Trusts. they are essentially composed of uh, sort of the leadership of those particular land trust organizations there. So there are some really great folks. Dominique Russell over at the Kensington Market Land Trust, Chihai Tam over at Chinatown. They both they've done some great work. Obviously, one of the big sort of it's one of the big kind of initiators of the land trust concept in Davenport. And Tina, has worked with him for many years, but James Partnan over with Parkdale Land Trust. So these folks are heavily involved in the Canadian network, and they provide, it doesn't take, and we're registered with them as well. Tina's registered, and so what we do is, we receive monthly notices from them as to whether they're holding meetings and things of that nature, and usually what they do is provide PowerPoints from those meetings and discussions there too, really kind of laying out some overviews on how their own land trusts are put together. And one thing I would also say too is, for everybody here, if you're further interested, the land trust, their own websites as well. What they do is they have sort of an overview as to how they were developed, some of the motivation behind it. So whether it's Kensington Market and the research with University of Toronto that was done, whether it was Parkdale kind of putting together, sort of organizing around community gardening. So there's usually they have those kind of broad overviews in terms of how they organize, or organizational statements. So I would recommend both of those avenues to the Canadian network of community land trusts and the land trusts, their own websites or social media itself as well. Yeah, I'm getting my John Lockean hat on. It's like you have to labor mixing and all that and all that. I for me personally, I like you can't like it's unrealistic because ultimately the idea that somehow land, people will suddenly be unmotivated to use land because suddenly they don't have a the aim to labor on it to improve it, because there's always some belief that somebody will do it for them. I mean, again, that rests on and I'm sorry, this is like my kind of poli sci kind of hat a little bit, but or political theory, it rests on a kind of fallacious idea that, essentially, it rests on a fallacious idea that individuals basically, you know will it rests on the idea that land is sort of separable, that land can be sort of basically held in divisible units from one another, right? And so you can just trust that somebody will always so if you can believe that, oh, okay, land's held in common, so somebody will always develop my land or what have you, it's not realistic, because ultimately we have to understand that everything is derived from this fundamental interconnection in terms of how things are held together. And I feel that the land trust very much supports that particular framework, because ultimately it's not just about preserving affordable housing, because any hopefully any government initiative can do that, without having to put together a land trust. But ultimately, a land trust for me is a concept that allows individuals to basically have housing that can serve its greatest need. It adds to their personhood. It adds to their it adds to their social, political, economic, cultural viability. It sort of allows them a place within democratic society, so to speak. And I feel that that's what a land trust does for individuals who are underserved, for individuals who don't have the means to contribute. And for me, I just don't think that this whole tragedy of the commons concept, it ignores previously existing imbalances that undermine that idea, that undermine individuals' ability to participate in democratic society, that undermine individuals' ability to develop their full personhood. And, that's the thing. Like, for me, it's unrealistic to assume that the commons, to basically isolate this concept of the commons without really understanding, okay, um, it's like, yeah, it's like without understanding, colonial settlement, without understanding, slavery, without understanding, prevailing social, economic, cultural discrimination, So that's my response to that, I guess, in terms in terms of that. But that's, for me, that's on a broad level. That's what I think land trusts. That's the objective that land trusts serve. And again, land trusts are not a magic bullet. They're not a kind of catch-all idea that solves all these prevailing issues. But at the same time, it's a decent enough start that I think individuals can build upon. And they're flexible enough to serve a multitude of needs moving forward. So that's my kind of summation on what land trusts kind of mean to me. If anybody over here would like to participate in, if anybody would like to further contribute, what they like about what we're doing, anything they'd like to have, any suggestions they have as to what we could do. I mean, although, maybe some of you aren't living in the immediate area or not working in the immediate area, it doesn't mean that, we can't be inspired by what anyone suggests. We're at a stage where, we're more than happy to take in anything. Any support we can get is invaluable. So feel free to, send a email to me send an email to me. I've included it in the PowerPoint as well. So again, I just, I encourage you all to, just follow up if you like.